Welcome back to Bull City Coordinators. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Duke Football Coverage Podcast, but as you're about to find out, we do not have a former football player joining us tonight. This is a first. So I'm going to skip all the where to follow us. I'm going to skip the Twitter accounts. I'm going to skip the website. I'm going to skip all that. I'm just going to get right to it. We have our first former Duke basketball player. And for those of you who grew up when I grew up, this was the first high flyer, the dunker, the shot blocker, the physical player, the guy who could get everything and just be real physical, real aggressive for the Blue Devils from the 86-87 season to the 89-90 season. A 6'5", small forward out of Fayetteville, North Carolina, number 21, Robert Brickey, is joining us. Mr. Brickey, should I call you Robert, Mr. Brickey?
I have been called a lot worse. Robert is fine.
Well, I got to tell you, and I'm not saying this to make you feel old, your first game in Durham would have been 1986.
Right.
Okay. I was 5 when you started playing for the Blue Devils, and I'm 40 now.
So far you failed your mission. Now you're making me feel old. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to say this, though. Because people out there may not realize this, but you wore what I think is arguably the most productive number in the history of Duke basketball, number 21.
Mm-hmm.
From my lifetime, you had Jay Billis, you, Antonio Lang, another pretty good player. You had Trajan Langdon, pretty good player. Chris Duhon, pretty good player. DeMarcus Nelson, Miles Plumlee, Emil Jefferson, and I think most recently it was Matthew Hurt. I can't remember if there's anybody between Jefferson and Hurt or not, but that's a pretty great number that you did.
Right. You know what? I knew a few of those. I didn't realize all those guys had worn that number. Matter of fact, if you back up a few years, I don't know if you remember Bob Bender. He was an assistant when I was at Duke. When he was at Duke, he wore number 21. So that number goes a long way back. Well,
I will. Who do you want to give credit for starting the number 21 list? Because you clearly carried it on. Do what?
I'm going to take credit on this one. You know what? No, that's a pretty interesting fact that guys, that number has stayed in service and been productive. That's really interesting.
And I believe every championship that has been won had a number 21 on the roster. Antonio for the first 2, Duhon, I believe, for the third, Miles Plumlee, and then Emil Jefferson.
Wow. You know what? I'm going to call John Shire and say, hey, you need to keep your number 21 around. Maybe your career will go as well.
All right. Now, we talked a little bit beforehand about what I was going to ask you about, but I have a surprise question for you.
Okay.
This is from my dad. Okay.
All right.
He wanted to know what your favorite block at Duke was. Because he remembered one in a non-conference game. He said he couldn't remember the year, and he said I should have remembered, but I would have been 6 or 7. So I'll use that as an excuse. But he said you blocked one shot so hard that he thought there was a dent in Cameron Indoor on the floor.
Man, it's weird. That was so long. It's hard to remember individual moments. I do remember one block. We played Indiana in 87. The first or second round of the NCAA tournament. And it was under out of bounds Indiana ball under their own basket. Marty Nestle and I got mixed up on a screen, and there was a guy wide open. He caught it right underneath the basket, and he was about to dunk it. And I spun around, and I jumped up, and I caught it before he dunked it and blocked it and threw it out and kind of took it out of his hand and threw it out of bounds. But I don't know if I could do it again. It was just such a reactionary thing. I was like, oh God, we have botched this assignment. And I got, and I was like, this is our only chance to recover. And, but it was, that's probably one of the few blocks I do remember.
Was that the year Indiana went to the finals and won?
Yes. That was Keith Smart and Bobby Knight and Steve Alford was on that team. Yeah, they had a really good squad that year.
Well, the next couple of questions I had for you are actually from my friend Mike Klein, who when I started doing the blog, Bull City Coordinators, that then has turned into this podcast that I'm doing. He was doing it with me.
Right.
And he had a couple of questions because if I remember correctly, he said that you were the one who made him become a Duke basketball fan. And he wanted me to ask you your thoughts about, well, before I get to that, let me ask you this. Because even though this is a football coverage podcast, I can't have you come on here and not ask you about Duke basketball. I have too many great memories of you guys when I was growing up. You know, my dad, we didn't have a lot of TV options like everybody does now. My dad would record a lot of games on his Betamax. And so if we were sick,
Betamax.
Right. You know, we didn't have a lot of options. So I remember when I was sick, sometimes I would just watch old games, you know, I see you guys, Danny Ferry, Quinn Snyder, you know, all those guys, Phil Henderson playing basketball. So I got to talk a little bit of basketball with you, but tell us what your thoughts are on Coach K stepping down and what Duke basketball is going to be like going forward, do you think?
Well, man, what do you say about a legend? You know, what do you say about the greatest coach in college basketball history? I will say this. I think he's a better person than he is coach. That's saying a lot. And, but, you know, if in anybody's career or job, if you do such a good job during your time that you are recognized as one of the greats and you do so well that you can name your successor, that's saying something. And, man, it's just been an amazing ride with an amazing person. And it's been fun. And, you know, I still get to go to a few games when I can. And so I just hats off to him. I wish him well in whatever the next thing is in his life, because, you know, if I know Coach K, he's a guy that's going to have his hands in a number of things. And I'm sure he'll still be connected to Duke in some ways. But I think the future looks bright. You got to think he knows something about John Shire that we don't know. He recruited the kid. He coached the kid. He's not a kid anymore. But he's been on his bench for 8 years or so. So, you know, if Coach K trusts him, we all have to trust him. And I know John a little bit, and I've had some conversations with him. I think we're left in good hands, and as evident by the recruiting class that they've begun to assemble for 2022. So, you know, you can't win without quality players, and they are putting together a great squad. I think the staff that he's built is a really good staff too. Got Chris Carrawell and Nolan Smith, Emil Jefferson. I think those guys are have a little bit younger blood and maybe can relate to kids a little better these days. So I think we're going to be in good hands, and the future looks bright so far.
Well, good. Now, let me ask you a little bit of what Mike wanted me to ask you about. What's the most important lesson that you learned from Coach K?
Wow. You know, that's a great question. I mean, that's an easy question. Preparation. He is the most prepared person I've ever met. When he goes into a game, now, of course, I knew a little bit while I was in college, but as I've gotten older, and I've been able to go back, and I've been a coach myself, and, you know, I see some of the things that he sees on the floor. He is the most prepared person. One of his neighbors, when I was in school, he said, my bathroom was on the side of the house where Coach K's film room was. This is in the 80s. And that's when you had that old film that you had to roll on a reel. You had to thread it through the machine, and it had that flicker.
Yep.
He said, I would get up to go to the bathroom many nights, and I would see the flicker of that film from the window in his house at 4 and 5 in the morning. So, you know, he's watching film from that game. He's watching film for upcoming opponents and making notes. And, you know, and even with his stint as Olympic head coach, I hear stories about him preparing and doing all kinds of things that may not be basketball related, but they have to deal with leadership and team unity and bonding. And so he's got an amazing ability to lead and understand what it takes to get people on board. and his preparation is the key. So I think about things now when I have to get prepared. I'm thinking, sometimes I think, am I prepared like Coach K would be prepared? So like if you got a court case or if I'm meeting with a client, there's documents you got to get together and paperwork. And you gotta have all these things ready. So when you sit down with your client, you've got your ducks in a row and the meeting can go smoothly. And he is by far the most prepared guy I've ever met. And I have taken that lesson to heart many times in my life.
Well, tell us a little bit. I was watching some highlights to get ready for our talk.
Right.
And I saw a dunk that you had in 1989 against North Carolina. You stole the ball, took it down the court. I think it was at Duke, and you just dunked it on somebody. I couldn't quite tell who it was on. And I started thinking about how intense the UNC rivalry, Duke-UNC rivalry was back then. And that was something else Mike wanted me to ask you about.
Right.
What was it like back then, the intensity? And you've stayed involved with the program since then. What's the rivalry like from an intensity level today?
Man, it has not subsided at all. You think that was 30 years ago when I played, but there's still that intensity in the rivalry, a kind of a love-hate relationship. And when I was in school, my first year, I never forget this. We're playing at home, Carolina at home, and there were times it was so loud in Cameron, you couldn't hear the referee's whistle. So the referees, Lenny Wirtz and Paparo running around trying to stop the play because they blew the whistle, but nobody heard it. And I would just remember looking around at the insanity going on in the building, like this is absolutely insane. But I'm glad they're on my side because, and I think I'm not even sure if we won the game, but I really learned. I was like, man, this thing is real. And if I back up to my senior year in high school, I came up to watch several games down the stretch. Of course, that was that 86 team, Johnny Dawkins, Billis, Allery, Tommy Amaker, Dave Henderson. They went to the national championship and lost to Louisville. So I came to watch them play Notre Dame. They had David Rivers. They were top 10. NC State was really that good that year. Carolina. And they played Georgia Tech. They had Mark Price, Joseph. I mean, ACC was stacked that year. And so I watched about 7 games down the stretch, culminating with the Carolina game. And so, kids camping out, and it was spring by then, so the weather was nice. They've got hot tubs in the parking lot. They're cooking out. They got pizza. They're throwing frisbees. They got kegs of beer everywhere. So my high school buddies and I show up, and we're walking around like, is this what college life is all about? If so, I'm in. So, man, it's been, I don't know if anything I've ever experienced anywhere else in the country compares to what the Duke and Carolina rivalry is like.
Well, tell us a little bit about what you're doing. Just the way I like to do these is give everybody who comes on a chance to introduce themselves to the audience. Right. And with the football players, I think that's especially important because we don't usually see their face,
right,
hidden behind the helmet, shoulder pads, what have you. But just tell us what you're up to these days. What are you doing?
Well, my elevator speech is usually I help people sleep better at night. Because what I do, it takes too long to explain it. And if you are inquisitive enough after I say that question, then I'll go into what I really do. So my technical title is Investment Advisor Representative. So I help people manage money, invest money. I put together a retirement plan, full retirement plans, including life insurance. But I also do employee benefits. So I help people put in benefit packages and also do some 401ks and retirement plans for companies. So that's a lot to say in the elevator. But what I really help you do is put a plan together so that if you check out or your spouse checks out or your business partner checks out, you have a plan in place. And because I have some clients when we meet and I'm making notes and I'm thinking, how in the world do you sleep at night? You make a good living, but you've got no semblance of a plan. And if you check out, this is going to be a mess. And you're going to leave your spouse or kids or business partner with a real mess. So I'll just help them put a plan together. I help them put a plan together and walk through the plan so that at the end, I say, hey, now, when this is all over, you should be able to sleep well at night. Because if you check out tonight, at least your affairs are in order when you go.
I'm going to go a little off topic because you said something about making a good living versus being secure. My wife, who has an accounting background and a lot of prospect research at her job, she works for W&L and does a lot of research on donors. And we were talking about the idea of having a real good salary, a comfortable salary versus building wealth. And I wonder if you just comment on the difference between those from your perspective.
Well, that's a great question. The first thing
I ask questions for a living, so I bet
right. The first thing is we have to determine your incoming versus outgoing. That's the first thing we have to do. So a lot of people will have a great income, but they've got as much or more going out. So you're in a bad situation. So you're not in a position to build wealth because your lifestyle exceeds your income. So we have to make some adjustments. So building wealth is allowing your money to make money for you while you're still working. Having a nice income helps, but it doesn't help if you're debt ridden. And so if I catch my clients young enough, I'll say, our plan is going to get you to the point where when you get ready to retire, you have no debt. Because debt in retirement is pressure, which means I still got to make car payment. I still got to make a house payment. I got paying off whatever debt. That means I may have to go to work after I retire. And I know most people want to go do what they want to do because you figure if you've worked all your life, I've been working since I was 15. I work all my life and I retire. I don't want to go back to work because I don't have but a few good years left. And I want to be able to enjoy those good years health-wise. And then I want to be able to travel and do some cool things while I'm still sane. So eliminate the debt is the big thing. And then let your money work for you.
Tell us a little bit about let's talk about financial literacy, because one of the things that's coming up with the NIL deals is athletes are getting a chance to make money off of their name, their image, who they are while they are still in school. How important does financial literacy become to the student athlete and people like you? What could you do to help them with what they're dealing with right now?
That's a great question. And one of the reasons I do what I do is because I want to help people understand how to build wealth, generational wealth. So when you get started, when you're young, you remember the days, you think you're Superman, you're going to be young forever. You can run around, do what you want to do all your life. And then one day you wake up and like, wow, something hurts and I don't know why.
I turned 40 this year. I know exactly what you mean.
Right. But if we can teach young people just the basic principles of financial literacy, budgeting, live below your means, how to invest your money, and the difference between saving and investing. If we just teach them those four things, we've done a pretty good job. If they can live by those rules, they're putting themselves in good position. So I talk to a lot of young folks, high school age kids. Sometimes I think they're too young to get it because maybe they haven't started working yet, but I still have to put it out there. And sometimes we right here at Fort Bragg, sometimes I meet young soldiers, their first time away from home, first time to really get the paycheck. And trust me, I see all kinds of nice cars going through town and they drive fast. That's how you can tell there's a young soldier in the car when they drive fast. So, and I'll say, hey man, first of all, thank you for your service. Freedom is not free. I appreciate what you're doing for our country. Let's talk about you having a good life when you get out of the military. It's going to require some sacrifice early, but once you get started, it's easier. It's like going to the gym. When I get off work, my mind is not on going to the gym. I have to make a conscious effort, pack a bag, get in the car, go to the gym. But when I get there, I'm fine. I love working out once I get there. It's just the transition between leaving work and going to the gym. So if I can get them to go ahead and just start the process, then they've got a chance, because what's going to happen is they're going to start building momentum. And all of a sudden, 2 or 3 years down the road, they're going to start to see their money grow. Say, oh, and then they can see the possibility of how it's going to grow in 15 or 20 years. And I said, man, you can have a pot of money. Let's say you did 20 years in the military. You come out, you're 42. Well, you're getting a check from the government. Then you've got a pile of money. You have an employable skill. You're in a great position. You got benefits for life through the military. So you're in a great position. So, and I just, not just for military, but I do that. I try to do as much as I can for as many people as I can in our community.
Well, and your dad, I listened to some of your interviews. Your dad was in the military, so you know what those folks are going through. You've got experience with that. But I had this conversation when Mike Ramsey came on. We were talking about how really I think we need to go back to the high school level. And again, people it may be too soon for them, but I was working in high school. I had a job where I got paid once a week, man. That was great.
Right.
Friday, you got a paycheck, right? That was great.
Yep.
But what I wish that I had a better understanding of back then was where to and how to funnel that money to, like you said, let it grow, become passive income. So when you get a little bit older, and, you know, my son just turned 13, my daughter's about to turn 8, you know, you can have more security at that stage in your life, even if I'm an attorney, right? But a lot of people that I grew up with didn't go into law school. They're not doctors. They're maybe teaching school. They're doing more where you're talking about, you're making a comfortable living, but at the same time, what are you doing with your investments long term? And I think there's got to be something that we can do to better educate people about what they need to know, or at least where they should go to get the right advice and to get with the right manager to make their later years in life more comfortable for them.
Right. And I wish I had a great answer for you, but I don't. One of the problems that I see is you get married, you have kids, you go to work, you start dropping some money in your 401k, you think you're good. And you may be, but we don't know. We really need to examine the numbers. All right. Got to get your kids out of the house first. All right. Then what? Then you got a few years to kind of build some wealth, let your money grow before retirement. But are you going to have enough money in retirement to live the lifestyle that you like to live? Well, that's what we need to take a look at. And maybe you need to, and I try to recommend to all my clients, if you're participating in your 401k, that is great. But also you need to put some money in another investment vehicle. I've got one client who's a doctor. She said, I want to retire when I'm 50. Well, I said, you can't touch your money in your 401k to 59 and a half. I said, but as a penalty, I said, you're going to have a couple mil in your account by the time you're 50, 59. Before you're 59. So do you want to pay that kind of penalty? So we started putting some money in another vehicle. So she has enough money to live on for 9.5 years until she can touch her retirement. And most people get caught up in life is so busy, man. Think about you running your kids a soccer practice, you're going to school, you got your own job, you're trying to have a little bit of a social life, try to take a vacation every now and then. That's about all you can do. So most people don't think about retirement because they're so consumed with life think about it, you're going to be raising kids for 20 plus years. You know, so you got another 10 or 12 years to raise kids. That's going to take you to 50 something. Now, if you don't have a good plan in place, you're going to look up and say, man, I don't have enough money for retirement, but I'm 52 and I want to retire in 10 years. That's a common situation for people. So I try to help them get in and say, look, let's start looking at these things. Let's look at the numbers, Social Security with your retirement. And now we got you at $9,000 a month in retirement with no debt. I think you'd be okay. Now, if you go in with $9,000 a month and you got $4,500 in debt every month, that's a different story. So I try to help people just work those things out.
Yeah. And to your point, you know, as an attorney with some of the type of cases that I handle, some of these clients, because of what they've been through, the seriousness of their injury or the catastrophic nature of the death in their family, you know, they're getting more money than a lot of people have ever seen. You know, certainly a lot of my clients will sometimes get more money than they probably will ever get in paychecks, you know, for a long period of their life.
Right.
And that's a conversation that I have with them. And I don't know if you grew up this way, but I grew up a way you don't talk about money. Right.
Right.
Actually, my mom's grandfather would say, we don't talk politics, religion, or finances.
Right.
So we try to talk about sports, but then he didn't want to do that. And I realized all he wanted to do was have a nice, quiet conversation, nice, quiet dinner after he got home from work. Right. But so it's uncomfortable for me to talk money with these people. So, but what I tell them is, look, if you have someone who manages your money, go talk to them and try to manage it. If you don't, here are 3 or 4 people that you can go talk to, because one of the things that I've learned doing what I do is there's a lot that I don't know, and it's good to know when I don't know something and to recognize I need to send you over here.
Right.
You know, someone like Robert Brickey who can walk you through this stuff.
Right.
And it's important for them to find a way to make sure things go well for them after the case is over.
Right. And on our side, they always say defer to the qualified professional, because I have to deal with things that deal with taxes, but I'm not an accountant or a CPA, and I have to deal sometimes with things that are legal matters, but I'm not an attorney. So that's beyond my scope. So I have to defer people, but I know some people that I can refer them to. So if you ever have clients that you need somebody to talk to, I would be happy to do so.
Well, I like to have as many names of experts as possible for that, because and you and I, we're in the same boat, right? There's things we encounter that we may deal with, but that make us an expert.
Right.
Kind of like me in this blog, as my wife would say, but
you're having fun.
I am. I'm having a good time. You know, I get to talk to people that I literally grew up watching play, like you. Okay. And I've gotten to learn a lot more about Duke football, which I've told people I invest in it more because they're there for 4 years.
Right.
Not that I don't like the basketball program, but I think you mentioned this in an interview that you did with Andre Dawkins. The seasons start to blur at some point in time, is because it's hard to keep up with who's coming and going. Right. But I think it's great to have guys like Zion and Kyrie and Jason Tatum come through. It's great, but it's hard to remember, wait, which season was that Marvin Bagley was there?
Right.
Yeah, it gets difficult. But before we get into the football, which we are going to talk about, tell us a little bit about, after your career at Duke ended, what you did before you got to your current position. I know you played a little bit of pro ball and you coached a little bit. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I played a couple of years, and I got to a point, I hurt my knee in probably 93. And I had a bunch of problems. I ended up having 3 surgeries. It wouldn't respond the right way. And I got frustrated because I make my living by being a healthy athlete, but I couldn't do that. And so I started looking at other things to do. I was just really frustrated. So I did a couple of things, and I coached for a long time. I coached for about 17 years on the collegiate levels. And the last couple of years, I coached in the pro league in Canada. And then we have a semi-pro league here in the States in Raleigh. I coached a team a couple of years ago. I've worked my way out of coaching some because I'm like you. I get to help people, and I enjoy that. I had a client call me the other day, and she asked me a bunch of questions. She said, "Well, how much money do I need to make to have an advisor?" I said, "Well, you don't need to be rich. Most people think you need to be rich to have an advisor." I said, "We're going to put a plan in place. And she made an okay living. We put a plan in place. She is thrilled because she feels like she's going to have some money when she retires now. And so I get to help people. I'm having fun. And I still get to go do some cool things. Even when I go to games, I'm working because, your business is my business. We got to meet new people all the time, unless we're getting referrals. I don't get that many referrals. So I got to go mix and mingle and try to meet new people. So I enjoy what I do and having a good time. I'm healthy enough to enjoy the life and still get out and do a few things. I'm trying to play some golf, but I'm terrible at it, but I'm going to take some lessons, but I have fun doing it. So life is good right now.
Well, good. It's funny what you said about how, you go someplace, you watch basketball. I'm just curious if you have this experience, because a lot of my colleagues, we refer work back and forth, right? A lot of attorney colleagues.
Right.
And sometimes when I go watch a trial, I spend the whole time in my head thinking, I would have done this, or I would have done that, or like, oh, maybe.
Yep.
It's hard when you played at one of the highest levels. I mean, you went to 3 Final Fours?
Yep.
You played, and back when the ACC had a balanced schedule, which I know I'm 40, so I'm an older guy, but I'm one of the youngest people who wishes the ACC still had a balanced schedule. So you know how good you were. Everybody was.
Right.
What's that like for you when you go and you're watching a game, you're watching basketball? Do you find yourself sitting there thinking, well, this is what I would say in a timeout, or man, he really ought to take a timeout here. The coach ought to do this or that. Is it hard for you to just sit back and just watch and enjoy and be in the moment?
It is. It's hard for me to watch basketball with people, because what I see and what they see are two different things. Now, football is different, because I don't know football the way I know basketball, and I can analyze and dissect basketball. And if there's a game I really want to watch, I have to watch it by myself or with somebody who's very knowledgeable about the game, because the comments I'm going to make, the average fan is not going to understand. And I don't want them to frustrate me, and I don't want to frustrate them. So I'd rather just watch it by myself. If I don't have a big interest in the game, I can watch it with anybody, but I'm still going to say, I wonder why they didn't trap right there. They only got one ball handler in the game. They should trap ball screens. That guy can't make a shot. Make him make a decision. Why don't they press here? So that's always running through my mind. And then there are times, like I watched the preseason game the other night, and somebody ran a really good offensive action. I got out a piece of paper and I wrote it down. I was like I'm still coaching. But I was like, I like that. I said, if I ever get back, if I coach again, I'm going to have to use that action. So, yeah, basketball, I'm going to dissect. Any other sport, I just don't have that much knowledge. I don't have enough of a knowledge base to be more than a fan.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I steal ideas and things from people all the time. You know, I'll talk to a colleague of mine, and I'll be like, he'll say something, he or she'll say something that they do to keep track of stuff better. And I say to myself, that's a great idea. I write it down, then I make it part of what I do. Because if you get to a point where you're not doing that, then that's when you hang it up and you say, I'm done. I'm finished. I read a book by Coach Goldsmith, who came in to Duke after you had left.
Yep. And
he talked about how he realized it was time to stop coaching when he stopped scribbling plays on napkins or scraps of paper. He said, it's done. And that resonated with me in my legal career, because I've been doing it 13 years. Mm-hmm. I guess it'll be 13 years in November, but I'm always trying to soak stuff up, and I'm always trying to get better at my craft and what I do. And when you're not, when you realize, when you realize, okay, I'm not having that level of engagement, that's the end for me. Well, let's switch to Duke football now. And I will say, when I saw that Robert Brickey followed my Twitter account, that was a great morning for me. That was really cool. Okay. But when did you become a Duke football fan? Was it when you got to Durham, when you started playing basketball there? Was it before you got there? When did you become a Duke football fan?
Yeah, when I got to school, because I knew several of the guys on the football team. So, as a way, I've always been a football fan. So as a way to support them, we go to games, and we had some lean years, but then Spurrier was a coach, I think my final 2 years. Again, they run together, and so we actually had a couple of good years there. And so it was a lot more fun when you're winning. But, I love Cutcliffe. I think he's doing a good job. I love about him? He's had opportunities to leave many times, and he feels good about where he is. And that says something, because I've been a coach, and I know most coaches are always looking for the next opportunity. but he's good where he is, and he's done a good job. And man, he brings in good kids. They graduate. We're competitive. And I think I went to the second game this year. Haven't been back yet, but I try to go to these games as much as I can. Duke has done a phenomenal job with the facilities and how they've upgraded things, stadium and all that. So I love football, and I hope we continue to get better, and where we're competing for the title every year, an ACC title. So we got a little work to do, but Cutcliffe has done a really good job.
Let me ask you, since you mentioned this, I'm going to jump around a little bit, but that year when Spurrier is the head coach, his last year in Durham, and everybody forgets about that season started 1-3. Mm-hmm. Then Duke beats Clemson. And I watched that game actually for an interview that I did. There were like 5 interceptions. It was an ugly, ugly game, but Duke won that game. They ended up winning 7 straight. They shared the ACC championship. What was that season like as a student there, being part of that?
Oh man, that was great. I had a chance, when you're a basketball player, sometimes when you're winning and you're watching the chaos in the arena, sometimes you want to be a part of that, and with the football team, I got a chance to be a part of that. I got to be a fan and a student and not an athlete. So I got to celebrate with the guys that I knew. And so it was crazy, man. We go to games, we pack in there, and it was a lot of fun, man. We just enjoyed getting together, and especially when we knew we had a chance to win a game. And then that year we ended up winning several games, winning the title. And so I didn't rush the field, but it was really fun, man. I remember students just packing in. Then after the game, you go out and celebrate, hang out on campus. So it made the weekend better when the football team won.
So you mentioned that you were friends with some of the football players. What was the interaction like between football and basketball? Because you guys were playing at a really, really high level back then. I mean, I don't think people now appreciate the consistency that you guys had back then. And so what was that like for the football and the basketball teams?
It was great, man. I think they supported us as much as we supported them. So it was a great relationship. And we had some really cool guys, man. Just guys I enjoyed hanging out with. And, I look around now and I see those guys doing well in life. So I'm excited. I'm still excited for them. I think we got more attention. But part of it is we play a lot more games. They played it back then. They played 11 game schedule maybe, and we'd play 30. So we had as many more home games than they had games. But it was really fun. Roger Boone and God Almighty, Doug Atkins. I could name a bunch of guys, but it was fun, and I wanted to see them succeed, and because I knew when it's different when your football team is good. Your school is viewed differently when your football team is good, and I wanted us to. I know we were more of a basketball school, but when they say Duke football, in those last 2 years, it meant something. And, so I'm happy for our university and I'm happy for the football team.
Well, and you mentioned the year before they won the ACC championship, I think they were 7-3-1. They had a really good team.
Yep. And
you knew they had a chance to do something special. And I want to tell you a funny story about that last team. Okay. This was when I was at my old firm, and the work that I do, we would do a lot of medical malpractice work. Okay. Right. We would be suing healthcare providers. All right. Mm-hmm. And this was great. So, but we also had car accident cases. So who did we need to get help from in the car accident cases to prove who was injured and what the injuries were, right? We had to go talk to the healthcare providers. So they were kind of skeptical of our firm when you'd come around and try to talk to them. So I'm talking to this orthopedist up in Lynchburg, and I researched him, and I saw that he'd gone to Duke, mm-hmm. and something came up that said he was a football player. I was like, okay. And I saw he was there when Spurrier was there, right? The year before they won the ACC championship was his last year. So I'm talking with him on the phone, or I'm meeting with him in person. I can't remember. And I said something to him. I said, so you play football at Duke, right? You played safety. He said, yeah, I did. And I said, well, I got to tell you something. I've been watching Duke football for years. I mentioned you to my dad. My dad thought maybe you were a linebacker. So I at least gave him credit for remembering you, but he was a little off. You were a safety. He starts laughing. And all that tension is gone. Like this tension of me, because the firm I was working at, it all goes away. And I said, I said, my dad always talks about how good that team was the year before the ACC championship. And he said, we should have gone to a bowl game that year. They don't hand it out like candy now, but we were really, really good that year. And that was really, really, he helped me, I think, a lot more because that we had that connection in common, and we broke down that little bit of suspicion, and it was really helpful for the case. And that was the year, I think it was 2012 when that was happening, when Duke finally beat Carolina.
Oh, wow.
And we talked about that game when I was getting him ready for his deposition, man. And he was like, "Oh, it was so great. I was watching. I was so excited." But back when you were there, it was the ACC was a basketball conference.
Yeah.
Football was not as important,
right,
like it is today. Now with all the money, and you see Texas and Oklahoma move into the SEC.
Right.
Have you noticed any sort of you obviously are still involved with the school. Have you noticed any sort of change with how things are perceived or the importance of football, given that it's become so much more significant to the conference as a whole?
Well, I think you're sort of a purist, because you remember when there were 8 schools in the conference, and everybody was a rival. Like, I mean, really, who cares about Boston College and Syracuse and Florida? I mean, like, no disrespect to those schools, but you remember the good days, the good old days. And, our conference back then, I mean, Georgia Tech was good. State was good. Even though Clemson never got ranked, Clemson was tough. Carolina, Virginia, Maryland. I mean, it was, you had to bring your A game every night. So I think the evolution of sport has changed some things, maybe not necessarily just because of conferences. So basketball is different now. The way people play basketball, football is different now. And of course, conferences have taken over. If you're not in Power 5 conference now, and of course, I think at some point they're going to have like 3 conferences, And so, but what I hate is that takes away from the rivalries. If we don't play Carolina twice, that's just not right. And like, just think about attendance wise. If Boston College or some who comes to Durham, who cares? And again, it's no disrespect to Boston College, but if Wake Forest comes, or if Clemson comes, we gear up for those things. So I think I'm glad that the football team plays a bigger role in how Duke is perceived athletically now. Because how long has Cutcliffe been there?
I think 14 years.
Oh God, it's been that long. Yeah.
Wait.
So, just to have a consistent head coach, because we change coaches there pretty regularly for 15, 20 years, and then he has chosen to stay, and he recruited a little different than his predecessors. So, and he brings a little different energy. And, it's something to say about having a consistency in your program, because the worst thing that can happen is you're in school and they bring in a new guy, and the new guy runs an offense that you're not familiar with, and maybe he runs the I formation. Like, well, who wants to run the I in 2021? So, I'm glad that our football team has done better, and Duke's whole athletic program has been elevated. Not just football, golf has done well, tennis has done well, women's basketball. I mean, Duke is, considering the size of the university, we've done really well as in all of our athletic programs.
How hard is the relative size of the university compared to some of the other schools? Do you think that's part of what makes it so hard? I mean, there's the academics too,
right?
Size of the roster that you got to put together, but What are your thoughts on why it's so hard to be consistently good at Duke in football?
Well, football is a unique animal because if a guy can run a 4.2, your team is faster than mine, more physical than mine, more talented than mine, you're gonna kick my tail. Because it's just a physical game. If my linemen are 330 and yours are 290, we're gonna have some problems. So I think at larger institutions where you don't have the same academic standard, it's easier to get a kid into school. It's easier to build a roster when you can get in with a 2.2 GPA. And that's no disrespect to any school, but it's just I've been a coach at some public institutions. And it's just a little easier to get them in. And so I can build a roster with a kid that the same kid I love is the same kid you love, but you can get them in and I can't. Well, you got 3-4 guys that run a 4.25. We got our fastest guys at 4.37. It's a big difference. So the academic standard comes into play. I don't know if the size comes into play, but and you got to be a Duke kid. Like Duke is not for everybody. I'll give you a quick story. When I was in high school, Coach K told me that, and he said we only recruit a handful of kids. And I was like, yeah, I bet he tells that to every recruit. My first year in school, we bring in a kid from Ohio, and I don't remember his name. He ended up going to Ohio State. And I hosted him on that visit that weekend. And he was really cool. At the end of the visit, Coach K found me and said, hey, what'd you think about the young kid? Do you think he'll fit in here? I said, no. I said, I took a survey of all the guys. I said, we don't think he'll be a good fit. He called the kid the next day and said, we're not going to recruit you anymore. So he was serious. He's like, if the guys don't feel like he can still fit in, we don't need to recruit him. And he's right. And they only recruited, I found out when I got there, they may recruit 7 or 10 kids a year. I mean, so they're not chasing every kid. So they're really selective in who they go after.
What is it about Duke that you think lends itself to it not being necessarily for everyone?
Well, one, the academic standard. So you got to be able to do the work. And then two, it's just got a different feel. I love NC State and Carolina, but God Almighty, those campuses are huge. I just don't want to build a large, even though Duke is spread out, you're not dealing with the numbers of people. So, if you got 25,000 students, that means including faculty and staff, that's 40,000 people trying to move around and with no place to park. So, and then Duke's just got a different feel, man. It's got that Ivy League feel, sort of, and that's just not going to fit in everybody's on everybody's wish list.
Well, one thing that I wanted to follow up on with you was you talked about Coach Cutcliffe, what he's like. You were at school when there was a really, really good football coach there, Steve Spurrier. Mm-hmm. What was he like as a personality on campus?
It's weird. He seemed cool. I didn't interact with him much. So I know about as much as you do. But he seemed, the guys on the team, that's usually when you find out the truth. The guys on the team seem to really like him. So I was like, if they like him, he must be doing something right.
Did you ever catch any good zingers of his in the student newspaper and the Chronicle? I mean, he always had something to say about somebody. I mean,
did you know what I loved about Spurrier?
Stuff like that.
He was a personality. Like even now, I mean, you see him on TV now, he seemed like he had fun doing what he did. I didn't read the Chronicle for football articles back then, so I really don't know what he might have said.
All right. Well, so you mentioned you still try to go to games, you still try to be involved. I'm just curious. I know what it was like for me, and I don't know what I did to upset my dad to have him make me watch so many Duke football games as a kid and all those bad seasons. I need to get an explanation on that one.
Right.
we'll table that for another day. What was it like for you going from the high of the 89 season, and obviously you stayed involved, to just the lows of the Franks and Roof era, where, I mean, I remember if Duke got one win a season, I was ecstatic. I mean, we were like champions. We were world beaters.
Right.
You know? I mean, what was that like for you as a fan?
Those were difficult times because I went to some of those games and the crowd would be sparse. But to go out and feel like we won't be competitive in this game, that's not a good feeling going into a game. And so football games became a social activity, and we were more concerned about what was going on around the game than the actual game itself. So those were lean years, hard days to watch Duke football. But I was still a fan. I still try to support him.
Tell us a little bit about, and you probably didn't experience this much given how good the basketball team was back then, but what do you think a sparse crowd does for the football players, for the team? I mean, to show up to a stadium and there's not very many people there. I mean, I was at the Kansas game, and I'll be honest with you, I go to one game a year for the reasons that we talked about earlier. You talked about when you got young kids and you're working a job. I mean, your job's demanding, my job's demanding. I'd like to go to more games, but it's 2.5 hours down there, 2.5 hours back. I thought after the Northwestern game, which is a big win, more people were going to be sitting in the stands, and I was disappointed at how few people were there.
Right.
What do you think that does to the athlete?
It's not discouraging, but it's not encouraging. You're there to do your job as an athlete, so you're going to do your job regardless. But it does help when I look around and I know when there's a 3rd and 1 and we got to go for it and the crowd is into it. Sometimes that is the factor to get you over. And people are celebrating and have a good time. That, man, when you look around, you want to see the chaos and the celebration and the band and all of that. And that does a lot to help you continue to do what you're doing. I saw some of the clips from the Kansas game. I was like, whoa. I was like, there was nobody at that game. And, but again, Kansas comes to town. Who cares? If it's that Kansas basketball, that's a different story. We remember when they played Alabama at home a few years ago?
Yeah.
Alabama fans got here on Thursday. So they were renting RVs and hanging out. Man, they bought Duke season tickets just to get a ticket to the Duke game. So sometimes I think you got to play a regional opponent that might bring some fans, because if you're playing anybody west of the Mason-Dixon line, who's going to care? I mean, unless it's some powerhouse, if it's Alabama or, somebody that's a big name, they'll come, they'll bring fans, but, part of that is scheduling.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. And, you can read, if you haven't, you can read what I write on my blog, and I'll tell you why I started it. In 2019 season, after the jump pass just got so out of control. I mean, it just every week was one thing that was worse. And I spent a lot of time investing in Duke football after a long time. So I needed to get out kind of my frustrations, and Mike and I started doing this, and then it evolved to a podcast. And I like doing the podcast more because I get to have conversations with people like you, and we get to dig into topics. And I also think it helps the team to show that this 40-year-old guy who didn't even go to the school cares enough about the football program to take time out of his life to do this, right? And to give these former players a chance to come on and talk about something. I think it's important. It's a sign of support. And I'm a lot more critical probably on the blog than I am here. But what do you think it'll take to get fans to come back consistently? Because you've seen this even at Cameron, where fewer students are going to the game for some crazy reason. I mean, I can't figure that out. Why, if you had a chance to go there, why you wouldn't go? But what do you think it'll take to get more butts in the seats at the football stadium?
Well, I think from the younger fans' perspective, they've got more to do. Like their engagement is through a phone, and they interact with the world through a phone. So they don't need the same outlets that we did when we were kids, because we didn't have handheld devices. We had to go find friends and get a game going. You had to go knock on doors or call people, or walk around the corner, see if your friends could come out and play. So our participation was actual participation. So I love going to events to this day, concerts, basketball, football games. I love going to events. For older folks, you got to win. You know, most people don't want to go somewhere to see their team not compete and not win. The true fans are going to show up. And I go to games as much as I can, but it's not very often. But I like to see Duke win. If they don't, I'm okay. But I'm going to support Duke, and I want to see the football team do well. But I'm not one of those fair weather guys.
Well, and that's why we go to one a year. I get a group of people together. We go down there. My uncle, sometimes my dad will come up there, depending on what he's got going on. Tim will come down, and we had a great time at the Kansas game, and we really missed 2020. I mean, that was hard.
Yeah.
As somebody who's been around from a distance, obviously watching Duke football for a long time, that was hard. And it was hard. I think it was hard for the players too, not having your parents there. And it had to be hard for the parents.
Yep.
It had to be real hard for the parents. Let's talk a little bit about, again, because I think it's important for people who listen to this. I know some athletes listen to this who are transitioning from playing to not playing.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about what that process was like for you, and what athletes should know as they transition from being an athlete to being whatever they're going to do next in their life.
Right. That's a hard transition. One, especially if you don't know what you want to do. So, I felt my playing days would lead to a long career, professional career. So I thought I had 10 years to figure out what I wanted to do. That came a lot sooner than I anticipated. So if I think the way to go about it is, you got to get involved while you're in school. You got to do an internship somewhere. You got to start figuring out what your skill sets are. You got to figure out how your brain works. Like I have ADD, but they didn't have that label in 1978.
So they just ran you a lot to get you.
I mean, but my brain works that way, and I have to slow it down to be able to pay attention and get things done. But I didn't find that out till late in life. So if you can find these things out earlier, what are you good at? What are you passionate about? Do a couple of internships, because you may not like it, but sometimes Tommy Amaker told me, he said, sometimes you got to figure out what you don't want to do. And so then you start figuring out, hey, I like this part of it, but I don't like that. But maybe I need to try something that involves a little bit more part A. So if you can start doing those things, you'll start figuring out. And so when that transition happens, you're prepared, because you don't want to get to that transition and not have an idea, because now you start from scratch, and you may be, 22, 30, 23 years old. Now you're out here trying to figure out, man, what am I going to do with my life? So start earlier while you're in school, take advantage of the time, because one of the things about being an athlete is you have a great network. And so you can call on some people to help you figure out some things, and maybe make a call on your behalf to get you in a position that might help you down the road.
Well, two things I want to follow up on there, but you mentioned Amaker. That's obviously Tommy Amaker.
Right.
For those of you who are listening, you said athletes have a great network. One of the other things too, they also have, unfortunately, a short shelf life.
Right.
And they've got to have something. You got to have a backup plan. What was it Muhammad Ali said? Everybody's got a plan till they get punched in the mouth, or Mike Tyson, I can't remember who it was, but you got to have something to fall back on.
Right.
And to be ready for. So talked about your professional career. You coached for a while. How did you end up doing finance?
I was coaching in Toronto with the NBL of Canada. I came home one time, checked on my mom, and it seemed like my mom she seemed like she was the same age for a long time. And overnight, she became an old woman. I was like, whoa. And I realized on my trip, I was like, she can't manage her affairs on her own. She needs some help. Both of my brothers are married. I'm not. So I ended up leaving Toronto, coming back to Fayetteville, help take care of my mom. And I was like, wow, I'm gonna have to transition careers because I can't be on the road as a coach. She needs me to take her to appointments and do all these other things. And I was talking to one of my mentors who was here in town. He was an advisor, financial advisor. And he said, I think you'd be good in my industry. I knew nothing about being the financial side, but he made some calls for me. We started the licensing process and blah, blah, blah. So that's how I ended up in this career. I was looking for something to do after being a basketball coach, and my mentor suggested it.
Well, one of the things that this podcast has taught me a lot about is what the life of a student athlete is like.
Mm-hmm.
And that's helped me appreciate what you guys do a lot more because, and I'm not going to go into the story again here, but it seems really, really difficult to be able to compete athletically at a high level anyway, but also to do that when you're having to compete academically at a high level, like you have to at Duke. And one question that I like to ask people is, as a fan, which is what I am, what could we know that would help us be better fans and better support for the team and the student athletes?
Wow. That's a phenomenal question.
Again, that's what I get paid to do, man. I got it. I've been doing it for a while. I better be good at it.
Right. I'd say give the kids a break sometime. A life of a college student athlete in the course of a week, you got school, you got practice, you may have travel and other obligations. And some days you don't play so well. You got to give them a break, man, because it's just like, there are times that you're better at your job than others. You're probably pretty consistently good, but sometimes you're like, I hit that one out the park. Or, you know what? I didn't do that great a job on that. I'm the same way. I mean, like, there are days I am on it and I am on point. And then there are days, again, it's my brain. I have learned it's my brain. So, I take some supplements to help slow my brain down. Because I have 1,000 things going on in my mind at any given time. And so I need things to help me focus during the day. And when I'm not focused, I'm not as good. When I'm focused, I'm very good.
Well, you mentioned giving the kids a break. There are a couple of things I want to follow up on. If I'm ever critical of one of the players, I want someone to remind me of that because they're amateurs, and two, it's not fair to them. Okay. So if I'm ever critical of a player, someone just remind me of that because I try not to be. And certainly after doing all these interviews that I've done, I try even harder not to be. But one of the things that I've heard you talk about a couple of times, and you just mentioned it there, was it not being your day. Then I want to tell this story. I didn't really appreciate that. And it's interesting to hear athletes. I've heard a lot of athletes say that. They're like, look, every day is not going to be your day. I mean, I'm sure you had some games, and we don't need to relive them, that it wasn't your day, it wasn't your team's day.
Yep.
Right? I had a pretrial hearing in the case, and I can't remember how long ago this was, but it was probably 7-8 years ago. And I was going up against an older silver-haired lawyer who was the king of coal country down in deep Southwest Virginia. Okay. And if any judge had a doubt of how they should rule, they would just defer to this lawyer because of his reputation.
Oh God.
Right. And I'm maybe 32, something like that. And I'm going into this courtroom with a judge who'd done a lot of criminal work in his career, some civil work, but no real medical malpractice work, which is a unique field. It's very specialized. There's a lot of different rules for it. And I'm arguing stuff that I'm looking around and I'm saying, why is the judge taking this under advisement? Why isn't he ruling this is clear? And, the other lawyer is getting up and he's saying what he's doing. And I came back from that pretrial and I felt bad. And I've told the court reporter this because we drove down together. It was about 2.5 hours. I was like Eeyore coming back, man. There was this dark cloud hanging over me. And I'm thinking, I got to try this case to appeal it, right?
Right.
I got to try this case to appeal it and hope we win on the appeal and it comes back. So I'm thinking, how am I not going to introduce error? How am I going to preserve my objections? How am I going to do all this? And we go to trial and we win. After we get a plaintiff's verdict, and I thought I'd had the worst pretrial hearing I'd ever had in my life. And I learned a valuable lesson from that. No matter what happens in your lead up to when you have to perform, and when you have to go play, when you have to go do whatever it is you do for a living, you still have to show up, right? You have a bad practice, you better forget about it quick. You have a bad hearing, you better forget about it quick. And you better move on. And when I hear you guys talk about, look, some days it's just not your day. That's an outlook that I've incorporated into my legal career I tell clients this all the time. Look, I agree you should win on the law, but judge may not see it that way.
Right.
So you just better be ready to show up on the trial and try your case.
Right.
And that's the day you got to be ready for everything. And I'm not saying you don't prepare to go in, because like you said with Coach K, you got to prepare and be ready. But that was hearing you guys say that as professional athletes, I find very interesting. I find that commentary and that recognition amongst your peers that, look, you go out there, you get everything you got. Some days it's just not going to work. I mean, I know I've been rambling here for a little bit, but how would you as a coach incorporate that into how you get guys ready to play the next day? I mean, how do you get them to understand that and not just be down on themselves like I was, like you were driving back for 2.5 hours with this poor court reporter sitting in the car?
Right. There's a variety of things you can do. Sometimes I have done this. I go get the film. I come in to talk to the team. I throw it in the trash. I said, go home, enjoy the night. We'll try this again tomorrow. Because there's nothing you can say after a bad performance. It's just, you've worked, you thought you prepared as well as you could. You've done all the research on the opponent, put in all the schemes, and you get your tail kicked. I was coaching the Raleigh team a few years ago. We go on the road, and we get to halftime. We're down like 22. And I said, we're not playing bad. We just can't make a shot. And they were hot. And I was like, I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, do you want me to yell or throw something? I said, I'm not going to do that. But I said, we'll make some shots. They won't make as many in the second half. We'll get back in it. That's all I can say. And in the second half, we didn't win the game, but we made it close. Just because those shots that we missed a bunch of shots in the first half, but we made some of those in the second half. They missed a few. All of a sudden, they miss a few, we make a few. They get a little tight on the other side. So it became a game. And that's what you have to do in life. Some days it's just not your day. If you wake up tomorrow, you got to get ready to do it again.
A funny story about that. When I was a senior in high school, I was coaching a YMCA team. I was an assistant coach, and I love teaching. I love mentoring. I just love that. And it was the first time I got to coach a game by myself. The head coach was out of town, and we were down at the half. We were shooting, I think, 20% from the line.
Ooh.
Oh yeah, I know. So they came over, and my hand's shaking, right? And I just want to just rip into these kids because they were my age,
Right.
I could be kind of blunt with them. And my hand shaking, and I said, go get some water, come back here and shoot free throws until the second half. Came out, we shot 80% the second half, we won the game.
Right.
It was, it's just, and I was thinking about that while you were telling, sometimes it's just not going to go in.
Right.
You can't let it get you down.
Yeah. And you've done all the right things. Ball just didn't go in the hole. What can you do? Well,
one question that I want to ask you about, you were at Duke for 4 wonderful years. You've been associated with Duke for even longer. Tell us what you are most proud of your time at Duke, on the court, off the court, in the classroom, whenever.
That's a good question. I really don't know. I mean, I'm gonna have to do some. I'm gonna have to do some thinking on that, and I have to get back to you. I can't think of one thing. I mean, my experience at Duke was great. I did some good things. I did some dumb things. I lived and grew from those. So, I think that's what we all go through: is ups and downs make you who you are. Live long enough, you should get better.
Well, how has the Duke brand helped you in your life?
Oh, that's huge. Because when you say Duke around here, it's in this region, it's like, I've lived in other states, and people still know Duke outside of this region. I lived in Dallas. A lot of Duke fans in Dallas, and I've traveled all over, and people know Duke across the country. So it helps being associated with Duke, and especially because I was a part of a basketball team, and the basketball team has done so well for so long. That really helps. It helps a lot of times. Okay, you gotta go meet people that you don't know. Sometimes before I walk in the door, somebody already knows who I am. That helps. So being associated with Duke and just a great university and then a phenomenal basketball program has paid a lot of dividends in my life.
In your career in finance, when people research you, when you're going to meet with them and they see that brand behind the name, Duke Education, that's got to go a long way.
It does. Because, and I don't tell people this, but usually they assume I studied finance or undergrad. But they like to see the Duke name, associated with the person that they're working with.
Well, and I mean, if you go to a school with a loyal alumni base and that's known either in the region or nationally, and I'm saying this to any, people who are considering committing to Duke for the football team or what have you, it goes a long way. I mean, I can't tell you the W&L Law School has been tremendously helpful to me. And I'm clients today, especially a lot of the older ones who are established Virginia. They've been here for a long time.
Right.
They recognize that name and they feel more comfortable with you as their attorney by where you went to school. And it's a little bit of an icebreaker. And the alumni network, and you can probably comment on this for Duke, but I can tell you, for W&L, and I tell people this all the time, when you're making a decision about where you go, where you end up going, you want to look at the alumni network.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm sure that's helped you at times, and I'm sure you have paid that back to other people.
Absolutely. If when I give advice, sometimes parents ask me about their young players, where they should go to school. I tell them 2 things. Go where you're going to play, because everybody gets caught up on Division I. I said, go where you're going to play, because number 2, you got to build a network. And it's a lot easier to build a network when people know you. When you on the 12th man on the bench and you got to call somebody versus a starter calling somebody, that's a different call. And you're going to build your network faster when people want to know you. So don't get caught up in Division I. Get caught up with what your future is going to be and how powerful your network is at that university.
Well, Robert, I don't want to take up too much of your time. This has been great for me. I got to tell you, this has just been fantastic for me. This has been a lot of fun. Like I said, I remember watching you guys. You had some really good players growing up when I was a kid. This has been just tremendous for me, but I don't want to impose on your time too much. Is there anything else you want to say about Duke, about life, about the football program, anything else you want to say?
No, just want to thank you for allowing me to come on. This has been fun. I don't get a chance to do a lot of things like this, but this has been fun, and I hope it helps somebody. I'm going to give this piece of advice for any younger person that might be going to college. I heard a friend of mine told me this years ago, and I didn't get it because I was young. He said, 2 of the most important decisions you make in life are where you go to school, college, especially if you're going to live in the region where you went to school, and who you marry. Nah, I'm a young guy. But I didn't get it. But now I get it. So, you want to be in a place where your university is recognized. And when you go to apply, people know that university. So whatever region it is, you're going to have a greater chance of success in that region. And then who you marry. We won't get into all of that, but I'm sure you can attest that both of those are true.
Well, behind every great man, there's a great woman allowing him to do what he needs to do. There's a lot of truth to that, and who you marry, you want to be with someone who's very supportive of you, regardless of who it is. You want to make sure that person supports you and that you support them. And
absolutely, I
got to say, I've been very, very fortunate. One, obviously, as you can tell, my wife is letting me do this podcast,
right?
And she puts up with this, but she's been tremendous and very helpful, and has really helped my career take off, and wouldn't be what it was without her. So on that, I just want to say thank you, sir, for coming on. I appreciate it. Everybody who is out there listening, we got a few more bonus episodes coming up, but if you have any association with Duke football or with Duke in any way, and you want to come on and chat about your life, your career, whatever sport you played, and we talk about football, we talk about life. This has been a tremendous conversation. You know where to find me. I'm on Twitter. My DMs are open. bullcitycoordinators@gmail.com. Go to the website, bullcitycoordinators.com. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts. We got at least one more interview locked up for a bonus episode. And I'm working on season 2, kicking it off right, with a former tailback, running back from Robert Brickey's days. I'm not going to reveal who it is right now. I think it's going to happen. I think the older fans in particular are going to be really excited. So I appreciate your continued patronage and support, and go Duke.
I like it. Let's go Duke.